She's still a teacher.
Good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. I am here. Alan. Oh, I like this. Mr. Schiffer. Yes. Mr. Valley. Yeah. And Mr. Goldberg. Yes. And we're going to kind of hop around for a little bit today. But first thing I want to start with.
Hey, excuse me, Chris. There's something going on with the audio. I can't hardly, everything's muffled. Can't hear anything.
Okay, good. All right. Well, as you guys know, Lee County's had several wind farm projects over the years, and you have upcoming solar projects. In addition to that, you've got some pipeline projects, and several renewable energy type projects coming out. We've worked with the highway department a couple times on some of the wind farm projects in the past, where we represented the interests of Lee County with the developer and with the contractor. Under the road use agreements that were in place on the previous wind farm projects, the developer actually paid for our fees. Contracts were with Lee County, but the developer reimbursed the county. Actually, they just made direct payments to us, but to kind of avoid this check, that check, whatever. In talking with Dave and now members of the Renewable Energy Committee, I know I've heard that you guys are looking to the future. Okay, you have a wind ordinance, you know, a recently enacted solar ordinance, but you're wanting to go even further. Okay, because there's other types of projects coming up, and you want to take a look at those existing ordinances and see, hey, are these the ordinances that we need in today's current environment? You know, Lee County's been involved with wind farms for 15 to 18 years or whatever, with the initial Mendota Hills project that's even been redeveloped, and also, you know, now Big Sky, been it's big redeveloped. Okay. So you're in like a second generation of wind farm projects. And in that time period, the commitments that wind developers make to public agencies and to private individuals in terms of the leases has changed a considerable amount. So, you know, when you know, we were approached to take a look at the ordinance to kind of update it, it was you know, quite understandable that, you know, the ordinance from 15 years ago does need to be updated. Okay, so we were asked to just put together a quick proposal of what we could do to help you update those ordinances. Let me give you a little bit of background about myself, who I am. My name's Curtis Cook. I'm principal of Chastain and Associates. I work out of the Rockford office. We've got several offices across Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Wisconsin. And we do wind farm projects. We monitor wind farm projects on behalf of counties, not only in this area in Northern Illinois, but also down in Central Illinois. I've been involved in local government for over 24 years at Ogle County. And I've been with Chastain now for the last 5.5 years. So, you know, I kind of understand what you guys are looking at from a county standpoint, because I was on the same side of the fence, you know, on that same side of the table with the Baileyville Wind Farm in Ogle County that never got built for various reasons. Okay. So I have a background of county government. We have staff here at Chastain, other staff that have been involved with county government in terms of solar ordinances, creation of wind ordinances as well. And what we can do then is take your current ordinances, take a look at what your desires are that you want to make sure get included in those new ordinances. We can review other ordinances from counties and agencies across Illinois that we've already worked with and we have contacts with, and update your ordinance with your desires and what we see as beneficial opportunities in those other ordinances. Okay. The contract that you have in front of you today is it's an hourly contract. We've been furnished with your existing ordinances and a list of your checklist, what you want to make sure and include in these ordinances. And we'll be able to provide you with suggestions and recommendations or even other items to include in your ordinances. As a rule of thumb, my rule of thumb for development when I was at the county was a developer that is going to be benefiting from that development, whatever costs that are to be incurred by the county public agency should be covered by that developer, right? Because they're the ones that are ultimately benefiting from that development. So it's going to be our suggestion that any of the ordinance clearly stated that any of those costs need to be covered by that developer. In addition to, you've got the zoning, special use process, all that's going to be involved. But on the tail end, there's the construction side. Is that wind farm, or is that solar farm, or is that other renewable energy type development meeting the requirements that they committed to during that zoning process, during that road use agreement process? And I think that's where a firm like Chastain, with our wind farm experience and solar farm ordinance type experience, can help you. We've worked for not only the local agencies, but some logistics companies that are moving all the components around have called us and said, hey, we need to know what our impacts are to the infrastructure. And can you tell us what we need to do? So jumper bridges where they're building bridges over existing township or county bridges that cannot sustain the loads. Will help them get those designed and meet the requirements of that local agency. We've taken a look at the traffic impacts that those wind farms impart upon those public roads, those county and township roads, and help come up with the costs that they need to be reimbursing those local agencies with. And not only in Lee, Sal, Bureau, Whiteside, Gallup, but also in McLean, Champaign, DeWitt counties down towards the Peter, Champaign areas as well. So that's a little bit about Chastain, a little bit about myself, and a little bit about what we understand that you guys would like to have us perform, all the services you'd like to have us perform for you. Any?
Chris, your mic is not working. We can't hear you on Zoom.
And just, and one other thing, we're not gonna, if you guys decide to move forward with this, we're not gonna just have this contract signed and walk away and come back a couple months from now or something. We're gonna be walking through this whole process with y'all. So we're gonna be needing to meet with the community, meet with individuals, meet with staff, and we're gonna walk through this process together.
Yep, so Curtis, you want to walk through, Mr. Kitson just asked me the estimated cost of 25,000, kind of what I asked you before the meeting, if you want to expand upon that.
Sure. The third page of the proposal is a scope of services, as we understand it. If you want something different, all you gotta do is let me know. This is the scope that we kind of a broad scope, as we understood from the meeting last week. We're going to do an existing ordinance review. So we're going to review existing Lake County's ordinances on energy and sustainability. The wind, solar, the right-of-way development, pipeline. If you want us to do something with the upcoming battery storage, we can do that as well. And then the agricultural impact mitigation. We'll review model ordinances. Not only, like I said, first thing we'll review yours. Second, we'll review other model ordinances from other comparable counties across Illinois, and take a look at those ordinances and see, hey, what have they got included in theirs that have probably been passed recently or more recently that we need to put into the Lee County ordinances to bring yours up to date. We'll be happy to hold workshops with the committee, with staff in regard to the wind ordinance. And that's what I was talking about. We're not going to walk away and come back with this and present this one to you. We're going to have workshops together and we'll walk through this thing together. So we'll have workshops on the wind ordinance, wind energy conversion systems, solar energy systems, battery energy, based upon the proposed upcoming ordinance, pipeline, development of county right-of-way, agricultural impact mitigations. Okay, and then we'll prepare a draft ordinance, and we'll go through that with staff, with all, just tell who you want involved in that review process, and perform QC/QA on that, and then we'll also be happy to help with that adoption process. Make presentations to the committees and the board as you see fit.
Any additional questions? This is really taking it to the level that we need. We're tasking Alice and Dee with writing ordinances that we're capable of making minor adjustments, but we're trying to build the plane. And it is just becoming a challenge, to say the least. We want to make sure we don't miss anything and this gives us the opportunity to partner with somebody who's got experience across the state. And I love the fact that you're the engineer up at Ogle County, and so has the county board experience as well. So, Mr. Valley, do you have something?
Yeah, just quick county references. Just we're hiring a service. We'd like to look at some references. Provide that and have our staff go check real quick.
So the funny thing is Curtis has been working with Dave Anderson for several years already. So if Dave says that he's a top-notch guy, he's got the one in the county that makes more sense to me than anybody else. So, and I think you and Dave have gone back even prior to your time in Ogle County. So
David and I have been working together for decades. Actually, I don't want to date myself here, but I started at Ogle when Ron Brandau was still in office. Ron was my mentor at that time. So, yeah, I've worked with Ron, worked with Russ Ritter when he was here, worked with Dave Anderson. If you want to talk to some of the other counties we're working for, that's fine too. I can get you names. Matter of fact, one of my business partners in the Decatur office is the chairman of the planning commission in DeWitt County. And they just got done doing a new solar ordinance through the planning commission and redoing their wind ordinance as well. So we've got staff available to us that I can need DeWitt County, Champaign County. I'll give you.
we're okay. If Dave says you're good, Allison D, I'm going to look to you before we vote on it. Is this what you want? This is the company that you think that fits our needs?
Yes, I definitely think this is gonna help speed things up and make it more streamlined for sure, so.
I agree. We were asking a lot of Alice and Dee to write ordinances. That's not theirs. We need a professional, not insulting you guys, but somebody that does this day in and day out.
Oh, yeah, we've struggled to put something together based on others. So to understand this, we're looking at a $25,000 fee. Plus the additional fees will be paid by the people. Permits, am I correct? in that?
Well,
Let me kind of run through that a little bit. The creation of the ordinances, okay, that's the responsibility of the county. Okay, because you have to create the ordinances and tell those wind farm developers what rules you want them to live by. All right. So this contract, it's a $29,000 time and materials contract. And what we'll do is we'll start going through that scope that I talked about. We'll get to about 50% and we'll say, okay, folks, we're about 50% on this thing. This is where we're at. And this is where we think after all these subsequent meetings, we're going to end up. Okay. I'm not going to just go to 25 and say, oh gosh, guys, hey, by the way, we'll take it out to 25. We're going to walk through it together. In terms of the fees that would be involved with representing the county on the projects, the construction observation, checking, making sure that they're staying on the haul routes, being the go-between between the county staff and the developer. Those fees are going to be proposed are going to be the responsibilities of those developers. Yeah.
So something as simple as a setback, if we say it's 400 feet and they're 398, they're the ones who's catching it. Right now, we have no way of, other than somebody complaining about it. So they're going to be proactive out there in the community, protecting our assets of the county citizens. So
I think that's a very good move.
So is there any further discussion, anything? Nah, I knew Rick's got something.
I guess this is just more of an internal question is two things. A, I don't know if this was budgeted item, and if it was, where's it coming out of? And number two, in the event that it approaches over $30,000, we're to the point of where it should be bid out. And I know it's professional services and things of that nature, but how?
That's the great thing about professional services for engineering, as it was explained to me, you can't bid legally engineering services. Did I
That's
say that correctly?
Yeah, that's
So-
right. You don't bid engineering services, but you make a good point that there is a QBS, a quality-based system of selection. As a part of that statute, there's also a pre-existing relationship portion to that. And since we have a pre-existing relationship with Lee County, that meets the requirements of that QBS ordinance as well.
That is the question for finance, right? So we are, as this committee, fortunately, two of you guys are on finance, but that is the challenge, right? So we found the company that we think fits the need for renewable energy. I'd like to make a motion to send it to finance for you guys to discuss that, right? But I'm not, that's not my, that's for you guys to discuss, right?
I would, well, actually, I don't think it's chair, you can make the motion.
I'm not, I'd entertain a motion.
I will make that motion that we send this to finance. In hopes
For approval. Ms. Shippert, Mr. Wilson, any further discussion? Anything from any residents? Think it's a good idea? All those in favor of sending this to finance signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And anybody opposed? Fantastic. Thank you, Curtis. We'll be, 3 weeks, I think, is finance. So we'll hopefully you have some answers by then. So appreciate all you've done so far and look forward to working with you. Moving on, we have Brenda with Lee County Soil and Water. Fantastic. To kind of discuss the LISA score. We've had plenty of questions of how the LISA score is determined. And we figured we'd just bring in the experts so that way we as a committee could understand the LISA score and its significance to these projects. So Brenda?
That's what I can. I'll start with just a little bit of history with the report. This was developed in the late 90s. Okay, better? Is that better? Okay, so the LISA was developed in the late 90s before I started working. I started in 1998 with the district. So I'm on almost 24 years with them. The report is a joint effort between the Illinois Department of Agriculture and the Illinois Natural Resources Conservation Service. And then on the site assessment portion of it, they did bring it to the county level for the county board and I think citizens to kind of have an input on what those 11 questions were going to be as part of the LISA. So it was developed as a tool to be used by local government to make an informed decision on how you want to proceed with whatever issue is in front that requires this LISA. According to my state statutes or the soil and water state statutes, typically anything coming out of agriculture zoned property, you probably should have one done, just so that you know what's out there, so that you can make an informed decision. So the land evaluation portion of it was primarily developed with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. They took all of the soils that are in the county and gave them a relative value. And that relative value has several different things in it. The main ones are the uniqueness of that soil to Lee County and the uniqueness of that soil to the state of Illinois. And then it does take a look at the productivity index. Productivity index is not like top of the list. It was more the uniqueness of that soil so that we can save the more prime soils of the prime soils. About 90% of the soils in Lee County are listed as prime soils based on this report. Okay.
Lisa, I have a question. Why are we using that instead of the PI index? Like, as a farmer, like I'm very familiar with the PI. I start looking at the LISA and your portion of the LISA and trying to understand. They kind of fit together, but they don't fit together. So,
right. I cannot answer exactly why they did not use the productivity index, other than I do know that there are some soils out there that are unique to Illinois that aren't really found anywhere else in the United States. And there are soils that are unique to Lee County that are very limited throughout the state of Illinois. And based on the other criteria that they came up with, which I don't have an answer for what that was, they decided that that's how they were going to do that, because they wanted to save some of those unique soils because of whatever value that they had and whatever was growing on them. Or, like I said, I don't know the exact criteria that they used. I just wasn't, I wasn't, working at that time to know that. If you have further questions on that, I would be happy to try to find a soil scientist. Those soil scientists that did develop that report, they are retiring. So I don't know if if a lot of that knowledge is still around, like I said, that's like way above what I do. I just know that those are the three main criteria that they use to come up with a value for the soils in throughout the whole state, actually. And then in 2005, they were discovering that throughout the counties of Illinois, similar soils had different names. So in 2005, they decided to make it more cohesive, so to speak, across the state. So they took a look at, like, for example, we used to have muscatine soil. Now it's called muscatoon, for the simple fact that it had other properties surrounding the counties or throughout the state that was very similar. So they renamed it. They did take a look at the relative values at that point and updated them, so to speak. And so the numbers that we have for that now have been in place since 2005. Okay, it's not anything, well, the whole report is not anything that you really want to change from year to year. It is a legal document. And if you decide you want to change the site assessment questions on that report, that has to be approved by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And it has to be approved by the Illinois Department of Ag because they run it through like their legal stuff, so that if somebody were to challenge your decision based on that report in court, it will stand, it will have that backing behind it. So it is just a tool. It's not necessarily a cut and dry, just because the Lisa score is over 225, which is the county's cutoff number. It's not a cut and dry. It is a tool for you to use, or the governing body to use, to make a decision as to whether to stay with the Lisa, or if there's extenuating circumstances, that you could override that score. And I think that's the planning commission that does that for the.
So as we sit here and look at it, Lisa score is really meant for development near cities.
Well, it's meant to keep development closer to the cities and save prime soil.
So the challenge we have with when we have solar and wind come in, we want them theoretically farther away from the city. So that way we can promote development later on, whether it be the TIF district that Mr. Wilson was just part of yesterday and expanding that, or whether it's in Dixon, Amboy, or Harmon for.
Right.
How do we?
Well, that's where you guys have the flexibility, and you meaning the county board, you have the flexibility to use that, Lisa, how you see fit. When solar farms first came in, it was my understanding that the board viewed that as agriculture, so they weren't going to require the Lisa. And then they were floundering as to, well, what's the Lisa score? They had nothing to like go by. So that's where the major flexibility comes into play with the Lisa. Is you can use that in your ordinance however you would like to use that. So you would rather see the solar farms go farther. So that's where you can decide, maybe you have a different cutoff for your solar farms or wind turbines, or find a different way and not utilize that, Lisa, in determining where to put your solar and your wind or your renewable energy things.
I'm going to look at Curtis because we're going to go to him for the ordinances. Is this, you understand where we're trying to go? And is this something we can write into the ordinance that we want to still develop close to Dixon and Amboy for businesses, but as we look at these renewable energies, we actually want to keep them farther away from residential areas. Is that something that you kind of have something in the back of your mind of working through an ordinance?
Yeah, I completely understand. As I recall, from my time in county government before, our Lisa scores near municipalities or near existing development typically are lower and
Correct.
tend to promote development adjacent to development, where Lisa scores out in the agricultural areas away from development are typically going to be higher because Lisa wants to promote development adjacent to development. Is that the correct understanding?
Exactly it. Yep, and we can get you the 11, 12 questions at Dee's office. Because maybe we have to readdress those based off of renewable energy compared to an industrial type zone. And if we can identify those questions based off of what it is, that to me is the easy button. But then to your point, we have to go through the NRCS, I think you said, natural resource office.
And I really don't think that we need to change our lease at this time. I feel it's doing its job. However, when we look at the renewable energy projects, that site assessment portion does not fit with what we're trying to do. So I think instead of changing the LISA, that we need to change how we're viewing the LISA in terms of these projects. So maybe eliminating, not looking at the site assessment portion and focusing on the soil scores.
I think Curtis, you got some ideas. I can see it rolling around in your head, and I think we can come up with some ideas that the ZBA then can have some clear direction of what they want to. Because right now they're looking at the LISA scores going, well, it's not 225. This is what fits us. But if we have it specifically that, hey, we want it 5 miles away from a municipality, and that's where we're going to promote it, or whatever that number is. I'm just throwing numbers out, but I think that's why the ZBA is here too, trying to get some clarification of what we're trying to, as a county board, get them to approve. Am I putting words in your guys' mouth, or that's pretty close?
Yeah, and I agree, Allison. I don't think you want to change your LISA to match whatever is like what is hot at the moment. You want to stay consistent because it is a process. I mean, you don't just get approval in a few weeks. It's a long process to go through to change that whole report. And I would be more than happy at our office to provide like the land evaluation score for anything that you want to use, however you decide to use that. But I really don't want to encourage you to change it unless Dee comes up or Allison comes up and go, this really isn't fitting, what the plan is anymore. Maybe we do need to relook at that.
We'll see what Curtis and his team can come up with and see what his recommendation is and go from there.
I agree with Alice's comment that really don't change LISA. What you do is you use LISA as a tool in that ordinance.
Any other questions for Brenda? Anything from the visitors? Brenda, thank you very much.
You
got more
I
questions?
would like her to discuss the impacts of renewable energy on farmland.
Okay. In our office, there's the Farm Service Agency, the Natural Resources Conservation in my office, and the Farm Service Agency, for those of you that don't farm, they pretty much run all of the Farm Bill programs. So the Farm Service Agency views the property that has been approved and developed for anything other than agriculture, loses their base acres. So any wind turbine out there, any solar farm out there, takes away the base acres of farm ground from Lee County. And basically what that means is if you are farming and you're the farmer and you say, I'm going to put a solar farm on my farm and I'm going to put it on all 80 acres. Those 80 acres come off of your base acres, and those 80 acres are no longer eligible for any of the Farm Bill programs.
Even after it comes off?
Even after it comes off. Once you lose your base acres, that's it. The only way it was explained to me, the only way that it can come back into a base acre is if the Farm Bill changes that to allow it to come in. That has never been done, and they do not foresee that ever happening.
84, I believe, was the last time the Farm Bill allowed base acres to be adjusted. So
Yeah, and they
we're at
don't see that
39
ever
years.
coming into play in the future, or in the near future anyway. I don't work with the Farm Service Agency, to know that for sure, but in talking with one of the gals in our office that does do those programs, she doesn't see that happening in the near future anyway. So I don't know, unless there is enough comments maybe when it comes up to look at that again. But as it stands right now, you would lose all those base acres. So it can still be farmed. It's just not eligible for any programs after that.
Adam, do you have anything you want to add to that from Farm Bureau standpoint? I know you're probably working on getting that corrected.
We did support, or we passed policy to support those acres being treated as CRP. So if you're in a conservation reserve program, your base acres are suspended. You're not eligible for any other government payments because technically you're already getting a government payment to do those acres. And so we have proposed policy, and it's being pushed by our lobbyists to allow those acres to be suspended. So you put 80 acres in, it's treated like CRP. So in 20 years, those solar farms come out, it's probably going to be the next generation farming it, even though the current generation potentially is getting a really good payment per acre for that farm. It's still unfair to that next generation to have to walk in and all of a sudden have this ground with no base acres and no way to get government subsidies or get that extra stipend they need to make it through. So yes, we are pushing for the base acres to be just suspended, treated like CRP or any other program, that they're there when it comes out. And I believe in 2012, they did have, we could adjust our acres. I don't think it was technically adding base acres in, but you could go in and argue that you had acres that you wanted to do. So technically you got to re-enroll base acres in 2012, but it wasn't coded that way, but you were able to adjust your acres.
And that as the insurance, the farm insurance, or
So I would agree. That was a readjustment process. So to update the cropping practice, not to add new acres. And they don't want to. seem to
Yeah, you
ever wanna
couldn't add
new
80 acres, but if you had 2 or 3 acres here or there, you could, you know, hey, I do have this. Okay, you proved the boundaries. It was allowed. So I mean, you could slip some ground in 2012, but yeah, it's been,
it was based off taking fence lines out, timber,
Yes.
stuff like that. It wasn't to add a whole 80 acres that you cleared.
yes.
So
And Brenda's right, there is potentially no chance of ever seeing a farm bill with that included. And I don't know, maybe 75% of the acres in Lee County are in programs.
Yes, I don't have. I don't
Nobody
look
actually
that
knows, but there is a
closely, yeah.
large number of acres in the county that have never been certified or are not part of the programs. Guys just farmed it and they're done.
Well, based on that, I just feel like when I found that out, I feel like that is going against our comprehensive plan. The goal of Lee County is to preserve prime farmland. So I do have concerns moving forward with solar based on this. You know, you look at wind, we have less than 300 turbines in the county, estimate about 2 acres per turbine. You know, that's 600 acres that we've given up for wind, but now, you know, we've already approved 10,000 acres of farmland we are giving away for renewables. So I think we need to consider that moving forward.
I believe that discussion probably has to happen at the planning side, not at renewable energy or even on the county side. Would you guys agree with that? That they have to decide in a comprehensive plan. We've talked about it. We've talked about comprehensive once. We've talked about it 300 times, right, Rick? That comprehensive plan needs to be updated to decide whether or not that's where we.
I agree, but it's definitely a consideration that needs to take place. Correct.
And I guess that's my contention all along, is that the planning commission and the long-term plan hasn't addressed solar, and we're moving forward with all these changes potentially. And so we're kind of getting the cart before the horse, in my opinion. It'd be nice to have that looked at and readdressed with all these new technologies and stuff coming for us. So that's the concern that I have.
In 2017, the planning commission did review solar and did take a position on it. However, you know, finding out this new information, it kind of has taken me in a different direction.
So I think it'll be addressed at the planning side, and we just continue to push for a comprehensive plan. And I believe you guys are working on that, trying to figure out which direction you want to go for a comprehensive plan, or at least an opinion coming out of planning of what these large solar farms, what our direction is for the county. So
Starting that process.
fantastic. Anything else for Brenda?
kind of a general comment, as long as Kurt's here and gonna be potentially working on the zoning. I don't know if some of these first windmills had a proper AMA done or one at all, but potentially have a new or updated AMA completed and registered with the Illinois Department of Ag before any permitting, before any landowners are contacted, just to make sure everything is done right by the books, no water, drainage, nothing is damaged. It's left as is when the new project is completed.
Yep, so all repowers have to comply with certain standards. One of the big things that we continue to talk about from a wind standpoint is this radar technology that I've talked about it several times to people in the country, and they love the idea of it. That repowers are going to even have to be held to this radar technology, which is fantastic for the night view. So the biggest complaint that I get for windmills.
Do you have some comments related to that, but I don't know if we want to wait till we get to the wind energy.
We'll just let Curtis work through it, and then we'll talk about it.
Well, there are issues that I've recently run into regarding AMA requirements and a repower, so
We'll go ahead and bring it up.
are you ready?
Yeah, go
to
for it.
there? Okay. One of the things that recently was brought to my attention with the potential repower coming through Lee County is they were not under an AMA initially. They're that old. And so as they repower, they'll be required to do an AMA. Currently, their collection lines are at 3.5 feet. They would have to be at 5 feet to come into compliance. And the landowners really are not in favor of them digging up this line to bury it deeper. So they are asking the county for direction on what to do, whether they can get a landowner or a waiver from a landowner.
I believe I'm going to use a Courtney Kennedy term. That would be a variance. That they probably just have to do a variance as far as to the AMA goes for something that's already in place. So maybe I'm wrong. I'm putting you on the spot, Courtney, but I think you've got the precedent's already there. The pipe wire's already in the ground.
My understanding is that if it was a county requirement, then you would seek a variance, but in this particular scenario, I would say a waiver of the AMA. But you would want to be really careful about that to make sure that you're not waiving all of the provisions of the AMA.
Sorry, wrong word, waiver. Thank you,
Didn't go to
Courtney.
law school. Chris.
Yeah, I didn't go to law school. I went to Western. I went to Western.
So in addition to that, they had also said they will be reusing part of the system, the collection lines. And so then if they're allowed to leave them at the 3.5 feet for a waiver from the owner, would the rest of the lines have to be at 5 feet, or would they all be allowed at 3.5 feet?
I think any new lines would have to be at 5 feet per the AMA, but anything that's existing would be able to get a waiver at 3.5 feet. I don't see a reason why to dig something up just to bury it deeper, but I think we have to do some research on that. Some help with Charlie, some help with Curtis to understand some of those things, but anything new needs to go under, the Adams Point needs to be under an AMA, and anything old, now, probably should have had an AMA in place when it was built, but we don't, so let's not
Wasn't around
reinvent,
at that time. So,
let's not reinvent the wheel at this point.
okay.
Moving on, I have got something? Oh, I'm sorry. I appreciate that. Is there any corrections to the minutes? If hearing none, they'll stand as read. Thanks, Tom. I'm going to move on to Hexagon, and I've got Scott and Will in the back, and Scott and Will are with Hexagon. They have the 5,000 acre-ish project east of here. And they've been kind enough to come in to kind of explain to us their site development and selection and kind of go through some different things. So we appreciate you guys being here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hey, everybody. My name is Scott Reamer. I'm a director of development with Hexagon Energy, and this is Will Hansman, who's manager of development as well. And Will has really been boots on the ground here working on the Stewart Creek Solar Project, which is in the northeast corner of Lee County. We've really enjoyed the process of it, and I'm going to let Will talk through some of our ideas as we are here basically to try and present, as you guys move towards a bylaw that is sustainable for Lee County, that works and meets all these various competing requirements. As a developer, what we may look for in the future, just to provide a kind of our perspective. And I think nothing we're recommending or saying is meant to be seen as like, this is the answer. It's more, this is potentially a tool that we've seen used in other counties and other areas that we've worked in that works for us, but that also provides protections for the county. And lest you think that, we're just developers trying to cram things down people's throat. My wife is a planner, and so we have a lot of conversation back and forth about how these things work out. So we hope that kind of what we're talking about may be helpful as you guys move forward. And we're looking forward to being part of the process. We've already done Stewart Creek, which is a 600 megawatt solar array. We've gotten that permitted with you. We have hopes to expand it. We think it's a good spot because we're in a rural area and we want to maintain kind of that rural nature. But with that, I'll let Will talk a little bit more about the project and some of the ideas we're kicking around.
Yeah, so it's certainly a big part of when we were originally permitting Stewart Creek was we were under the original ordinance that was passed in Lee County, and we knew that there were desires from the county to have us increase setbacks and adhere to additional commitments on our part. So we had proactively, despite the fact that the setback was 25 foot to the nearest solar panel, not the fence line, chose to set back and elected to set back 50 feet from every property boundary as well as every single road right of way. In addition to that, we chose to set back 300 feet from every single residence, whether or not it was classified as a subdivision. And we saw that based on looking at the previous projects that you all had permitted in the area, we wanted to look at those concerns and adhere to them in a more robust way. And hearing that you all are continually trying to expand and modify the ordinance, we think is definitely great. And hearing you all talk originally with Curtis about what the plans are in the county, I think is beneficial because a lot of ordinances have been passed and updated in Illinois over the past couple of years. I've been working in the state since 2017 on solar projects, and using existing bases of knowledge, I think, is immensely important because it helps developers like Hexagon know what most counties are expecting, and so that we can present a project that everyone is going to really work well with. Certainly, there are a number of other factors in addition to zoning and planning that these renewable energy projects factor into. Taxes, I know, being a very important one. And the benefit of these energy facilities is since they aren't as concentrated, they're able to be sited in multiple townships in Lee County, providing tax bases, not just in one centralized location, but really spread to areas that might not have as much development. So areas like Dixon and Amboy that are a little bit more closely packed, we know provide a significant tax boon to the area. But then there are other townships like the villages of Stewart and Lee that don't get as much taxation from that. So part of what we had done is establish those community funds and voluntary donations to those communities to really help them out, in addition to the tremendous amount of school taxes that we would be bringing in. For these 600 megawatt projects, it's about $80 million over the life of the project. Yeah.
So you bring up the donating to local bodies. How is that completed? Like we saw what Dixon's got. Some of these were just verbal agreements of saying, hey, we're going to donate $5,000 a year. Who's tracking that? Because this actually came up to me in a conversation the other day of making sure that you guys are being good quality neighbors, and it makes your life easier when I could say, hey, yeah, they sponsored the Little League baseball team, and that's huge. So
yeah, and I think that's something that we did, and what we had committed to was to the villages when they passed their resolutions of support. We made that a condition of those resolutions. But in addition to that, we made it a condition of our special use permit application. So we had written in our narrative that we are committing to this. I'm admittedly not a tax attorney, and I'm not able to give taxation advice. In the state of Illinois, I'm not sure how mandating that any voluntary payments are made. would work out, but it's something that we did because we know the importance of working with the local community rather than just following the ordinance to a T, because things do change and people want to see different changes made to it. So what really is great for us to see is Scott mentioned, we're looking at potentially expanding the Stewart Creek site because a lot of the neighbors in the area have now expressed new interest in joining the project after they see that the project is progressing and moving forward. So we want to be able to give them that same opportunity. So the revised ordinance would give us that opportunity and allow for people to continue to participate and use their ground in ways that they see fit.
But what I don't want it to be is just, hey, yeah, we're going to do this during the ZBA hearing and then nothing ever happens.
And that's a fair point. And I think, as you point out, that makes our life easier. If a lot of what we do as developers, right, is in working together is being trustworthy, and your name carries, your reputation carries. So I think earlier, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Curtis.
Okay, right on. What you were talking about is monitoring. You guys have done efforts to monitor and make sure projects actually adhere to what they stick with. We'd love to see that incorporated into even the way the bylaw works and taking that expertise and making sure that, developers follow up on what they promise. Even if it was a voluntary payment, it's written into our conditional use permit. So making sure that those are audited. We're very much in support of an approach like that. Brittany, you have a comment?
So the best way is for that municipality to get it in writing, right? That's like the first rule that you learn in law school, get everything in writing. So from our perspective, we would want to have that in writing anyways. In fact, the agreements that Stewart Creek had, those were both in writing. But when you get to the ZBA hearing, look, that's a good fact for us. So we would say that on the record, and I believe we did, we put that in our application. And then anything that we make, any representations that they make under oath that we present, that then becomes a condition that would be enforceable by the county.
So, but I've met some of the presidents in some of these communities and we're relying on them who aren't full-time politicians to enforce what these development companies have promised to better the community development. So I really want to take it out of their hands, who are a welder, a farmer, whatever, not full-time politician that does it once a month. So how do I hold, and there's reputable companies out there like yourself that are making sure that the donations are happening. There's other companies who say it as lip service to say, and then nothing ever happens. So
you can't the county cannot force private parties to enter into contract together, but what you could do is require any, formed agreements to be supplied to the county for the county to keep on file.
And then perhaps even enforce, as you guys look at that, if the group doesn't pay up, you put it in the press, it all of a sudden makes a long-term company look really bad. We don't get any future permits. It's kind of a vicious cycle, but we'd be amenable to that because we aim to stand by what we say we're going to do. And kind of on switching gears a little bit towards some of the original questions and what we wanted to talk about. We're aware that there's competing goods here, right? Where you guys stand to gain a lot from these renewable energy projects in terms of their tax base and in terms of farmers being able to participate and in terms of soil rejuvenation. There's a lot that goes into it. But there's also the fact of the matter that people don't necessarily want to live right next door, especially in large population centers, right next to a really large solar project. And you were talking about that with the LISA here a second ago. As it's intended to operate, the LISA should help development be pushed towards urban centers. And instead, renewable energy projects, we want the opposite. We want them to be pushed away from urban centers. So what I've been thinking about, and what I'd like to pitch is a way to start thinking about this, and can be modified completely, is sort of what we call a solar overlay district. So this is, show everybody here very quickly. We have some small printouts of this as well for anybody who might like to look. But this is a map of Lee County right here. And what we've got is population is over 5. Oh, well, actually, just for reference sake, here are already approved solar projects. Already approved solar projects. These are all even these are population. Each one over 5. So you see the rings around them, the 3 mile population. Send it to right now. What we were kind of thinking is that it could stand to benefit everybody.
us as a developer to just ease the process of this permit. And they also give you guys a lot of leeway. There would be a solar overlay, where in that area, perhaps solar projects may be as long as it's subject to the bylaw. Person and take all of the actual, like that. You would have confidence in the developer, that we can continue to develop in those areas, even if they have to do it. As long as that's at high level. At the same time, projects, future projects, nothing. Further, I think it's all I don't know. And what to do. I've seen this work in very safe. Working on it, I've worked with people on this. It's a pretty broad line. So what I'm kind of thinking, this may be a tool to make help everybody get something. I really think all it their urban integrity one or their ability to and we have confidence. We have to set up to be. We'd love to talk to you guys more about it. You know, work together with you guys. We're not sold on this, but Will and I were sitting brainstorming about how do we help match the competing objectives here that everybody gets something from. We thought this might be a good idea. Happy to entertain questions. This is really, again, a tool rather than the final solution. It's more of an idea and a tool. But would love to answer some questions or talk with you some more. But just a thought, and love to hear what you think. Anything to add to that, Will?
Yeah, I think in addition, these overlay districts are something that we have seen work in other areas, but it definitely, with other approved projects, there could be considerations where if they elect to expand or attempt to expand, they would go through the traditional process that we all know that they're able to work through. So I think that's what's really important about these projects, but ultimately it would, especially as this ordinance continues to evolve and grow, seeing the original one that we worked through, the amendment that occurred after that, and then the subsequent amendment, and now this new process going through, we believe that the ordinance is going to be at a much more comprehensive place where this could help to alleviate a lot of the time spent in those ZBA meetings that I know they go on for days and nights and months long in terms of a process. So we want to be respectful of certainly everyone's time, but also other folks where there could be individuals that have properties in those areas that are not within those overlay districts that could potentially have a solar project, maybe not necessarily at a size like we're seeing with Stewart Creek or South Dixon, but something that they ultimately would want to work through. And a project that's a little bit smaller may take some time, but ultimately we know that a lot of landowners that we're working with are certainly excited about this project. The majority of them farm their own ground, and they see it as a way to preserve it for additional generations that may not be lined up to farm immediately, but could look to farm in the future. And this is a sentiment that I've heard from Jefferson County all the way up to Lee County, that these desires do exist. So I guess to backtrack slightly and just as an addendum to address one of Chris's questions that we were working on, we did also include those resolutions of support in writing within our ZBA application to show that those payments are being made to individuals. And seeing as we would have a bond for removal, if we weren't adhering to the actual terms that we had committed to, the county would be able to draw then on that bond to remove our facility for non-compliance. So that's another important piece, is if we are not adhering, and I heard Paul mention not adhering to setbacks or someone potentially fudging the numbers, that bond and that security really does provide a hammer that the county can wield to ensure that all terms and conditions of the lease, of not only the lease that the individual landowner signed, but the permit and the considerations of the actual application are adhered to. And I think that's another important aspect that the legacy ordinance does have, and also something going forward that would be perfectly acceptable for the new one to have, because the county does need to have that power. Because if you have a 6,000 acre solar project and the county says, please modify your setback and fix this, or you're not adhering to that, the the bond is the way that the county can ensure that is adhered to.
We're all ears for questions and, we'll be around. We're in the area.
Would you be able to give us some insight as to how you determine where you're going to site a project?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess using Scott as a bit of an easel, when we first came into Lee County, it was back in 2017 when I first reached out to landowners. And the biggest item that I look for is an individual that is located near to electrical infrastructure, first and foremost, as well as a landowner that has a really significant amount of acreage. So we first started to work with the Faber family back in 2017, ultimately signing an option with them a year later. But they had about 1,100 acres that was relatively contiguous in the area, so that we knew at that point we would have a project that has a good chance of moving forward at that size, but then we can work with additional landowners nearby. If we were to arbitrarily pick a place and just send letters to everyone, you can get a lot of noise. And ultimately, if you have people getting letters who have 10 acres, 50 acres, 500 acres, you can get hits really essentially from one corner to the other corner. And it's hard to make a project and something that is a little more cohesive. So we want to start with what we describe as an anchor tenant, so that we can then reach out to everyone nearby. Because the great part I would say about Stewart Creek is it's not a project with one landowner that has a tremendous amount of acreage, or certainly one landowner that doesn't live locally. It's a legacy family that's in the area trying to preserve their farm. And then we're able to reach out to everyone who has 20 acres, 10 acres, it really doesn't matter. We want to afford every single person the ability to participate in the project. But if we started from that real scattershot approach of saying anyone in the county gets a letter, it can lead to a site that's all over the place and much more difficult to manage. So we want to focus on a specific area near electrical infrastructure. And that is also for us really remote. I know sometimes there are landowners that are close to large population centers that try and are successful in getting a permit. But for us, we think it's much easier to work with as many people in an area that has that electrical infrastructure, but its next highest and best use is farming. So it's not set up for immediate urban expansion. It's not necessarily set up for a new industrial park, but it's something that we can temporarily utilize. And this is a part of our permit as well, and the new ordinance also, that it has to be decommissioned after 35 years. But we've set it up in a way that it can return back to farming right when it's done, because it is in that area that is a little bit more remote. So there wouldn't be a solar development adjacent to a population center, new industrial zones or residences go on the outside. And then after decommissioning, you have a massive gap within it. So it allows for a temporary use and borrowing of farm ground to return it to more productive state at the conclusion of the lease. And so that's really what we look at, is trying to find who are those primary large landowners on existing electrical infrastructure, and also in counties that have an ordinance and a permit that we're able to follow, because we don't want to necessarily be in an area where there is no path to permit. Then we get the landowners are on board, the landowners excited, we go through the interconnection process, but then it hits a wall when there's not a path to permit.
So fundamentally boiling down, when we look for a new site area, we look for topography, land that works, right? We can't build on a steep hillside that's facing north. We look for access to power lines. That's really the point, number one starting point. So that's why we've got all the power lines mapped out here, which sort of show that's why these projects are concentrated around those power lines. And then no wetlands, that kind of thing, things that we can't, the environmental constraints, we have to work around those. We use a GIS software to help analyze that from the ground up, and then we go back into formal studies. But willing landowners that we can work with, zoning that has a chance of this working out, that we're not, doing something that nobody wants in the county, so there's willingness, and access to electrical infrastructure. Right? It's really what. So land, willing landowner, and access to electrical infrastructure with a path towards a permit. Those are the things that we look for.
And that was a part of why in our application to Lee County, we wanted to include the status of our interconnection with PJM, the oversight utility for comment, is to show we're not just signing an option with landowners and attempting to get a permit. We're taking steps which are certainly a permit in Lee County is not inexpensive based on other counties that we've seen. But interconnection itself is also not an inexpensive process. And as you go through, you have to put a substantial amount of capital on the line for those projects. Similar to a building permit in Lee County where you have to demonstrate a power purchase agreement. I think that demonstrating the interconnection process is underway is really important for us so that you know those steps are being taken and it's not something that has no chance and the developer has not given thought to where the project has to go, because generally speaking, the interconnection timeline is the longest one, and it's something that's not really in control. We've just seen interconnection delays generally as renewables come online, and especially with COVID over the past couple of years, those delays have increased a little bit, and it's something that it is more on the unpredictable side. They're required, and the utilities are required to return that information in a certain amount of time, but in the same breath, they're not. So they just simply have to provide an explanation as to why they could not deliver their study that was due within 180 days. It's something that they are tariffed to, but they don't necessarily adhere to. So it is like all of those factors are things that we look into, and certainly steps that we like to take before permitting. We want to know that we actually have a project that has legs.
As I look at the map here, I keep hearing that you can't build solar where wind power is. And clearly Stewart Creek Solar has 6 windmills, turbines running through it. Can you guys expand upon that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of, we're not saying you can't build solar where windmills are. I think the idea, like, again, this was us kind of just throwing out some areas that you might say in the future, any future projects that get built need to be in these areas. You could expand this out into this area. We didn't put a lot because there's no power lines that we're interested in. We didn't mean to add any commentary at all about, oh, wind and solar need to be separate. That wasn't our intention. It was more just like, here's a rough area that you could say could work.
But with that being said, as I look just south of Harmon there, you got, or over by Compton, can you have 77 acres of solar panel where you've got 3 acres of windmill? And I continue to hear, no, you can't.
You'd be able to, yeah. That wasn't us trying to.
No, but, okay.
Wait, I'm sorry. I may have missed the question.
So can I have solar on 77 acres with a windmill right in the center?
We would have some shading concerns ultimately, given that their hub heights are 80 to 100 meters, and they could shade it. And in order to construct, or in some cases, when the wind turbines have to be repowered or something mechanically is wrong with the turbine and they have to lay it down and take it up, we have to make sure that we're providing any sort of operations team enough room. But we are able to, and this is something I'm doing in other counties as well, working on areas that have a lot of wind turbines. There's areas that aren't used that are in those shaded spots, and areas where we need to set back for really insurance reasons in case something were to go wrong with the wind turbine, it would crush a few of them. But it's not as though they're necessarily
they're not mutually exclusive.
Right.
We've historically focused on trying to keep them separated just in terms of ease of access and, as Will's saying, insurance purposes, et cetera. It's not to say, we never would consider it though. Because yeah, as you point out, there are a couple of wind turbines out around Stewart Creek. So they're not mutually exclusive.
And another one of the factors is generally if you see a lot of development in certain areas where we're southwest of Amboy, and I can't see if there's a city in that spot, but ultimately that amount of wind in that area is going to be occupying a lot of the capacity that's available on those power lines. So generally when these projects are proposed and we have to go through the interconnection process, there's a finite amount of power that ultimately can be put on these lines. And we see that, and we actually did see it when we originally attempted to interconnect Stewart Creek, and this gets in the weeds a little bit. We wanted to go and interconnect at the substation on Paw Paw Road, but that substation is actually financially at capacity because the cost to interconnect is too high due to the fact that Junction is interconnecting to that same line and putting power into that space. So we found that the open line being the 345 kV line South Herman Road was a better path and actually had a chance to build a project on it because there are those existing constraints. And over the years, and these projects don't necessarily go in front of the board because they don't want to, again, go before they have some path to interconnect. They have withdrawn from the interconnection queue when they attempt to interconnect to those 138 kV lines near the village of Stewart and Lee, because they are really saturated at the moment with electricity. So that's another consideration that we look into is what projects are proposed in the area, and is there going to be a limit to the amount of electricity that can go in certain spots.
So how close are we to saturating the lines that run through Lee County?
It's very hard to say. And this is something I tell to landowners whenever I meet with them, certainly originating a project on a new area, we will only have the privilege of knowing when a power line is full after we pay ComEd to tell us. So that is something that we get to go through is we make a deposit. Yeah, it's not cheap. It's non-refundable, and they'll tell us, hey, it's going to be $1 billion to build your substation and interconnect to the line, and we say, nope, unfortunately, we're not able to do that. But if they tell us something more compelling, ultimately, we know everything feeds into the price of power that we can offer. And to get a building permit in Lee County, we need that power purchase agreement to show that the electricity is actually going to go somewhere. And so if the price of power is way too expensive, I mean, if it's $1 billion and they say, hey, we'll buy it at, or we can only sell it at $200 a megawatt hour, no one in their right mind will sign up for it. But if we say that it's at 30, 35, you can get a lot of interested parties that will actually sign up for it. So all of those factors do feed into whether or not a project's able to go forward.
There's no such thing as full. There's just how expensive is it to build a new set of lines. And so that's kind of, and some of the lines, this 138 that Will was talking about, is pretty darn expensive to connect to that right now. So as to be infeasible. So we're looking at one of the different lines, but they fill up over time.
Construction timeline, like we talk about it, we approve a lot of these projects. What's construction timelines look like from the time that, yep, this is a go, from paying the ComEd big bill to tell you that, yep, you can go, to when it's actually?
So let's say, we're looking at balancing a few different things, as Will was talking about, the interconnect permit, getting all of the surveys done. Once we got all of that, we call that notice to proceed. That point NTP, that's when they're ready to go out and break ground and get the shovel and start turning dirt. For this size of a project, it'll be about a 2-year construction period. So it's a pretty large project. It takes a while to put that many panels in the ground. Is that what you're asking, or are you asking how long it takes?
So then so that's 2 years to break down. How much from the time of you pull your permit, you pass petition to breaking dirt? How long does that take?
That is the golden question that we're working on right now, because obviously we want it to be as soon as possible. That's entirely dependent on, so that's dependent on PJM, who is the big grid manager in the region. That's who does these studies for ComEd. They do it for all the other utilities around. They do it out in Virginia for Dominion. They have to balance all of those. They're going through they're revising their process, let's say. Unfortunately, it's tacked a little bit of extra time onto how long it takes for them. So it could even be another year and a half or two before they finally give, for a project that submits now, before they give feedback on it. So that's part of the issue for us, is making sure our permits time up well with what the interconnection is, because we clearly don't want a permit that's not valid or that expires before we can begin construction. And so we're always trying that's a tough answer, because we're always trying to match that up. And that's one of the hardest parts of it.
And speaking specifically for Stewart Creek, when we applied, we were representing that we were expecting to begin construction at the end of this year into early 2023. We still believe that we can adhere to that timeline. As Scott mentioned, with the interconnection side, they were meant to provide us with an interconnection service agreement, which would allow for us to put our power onto the grid 5 months ago. And they haven't yet provided that to us. So part of why we went before the board was they had, as I mentioned, that tariff timeline that they need to give us feedback within a certain period of time. So we were expecting them to be hitting that timeline, but unfortunately, and again, COVID played a major factor into that. They had some staffing constrictions on their side where they didn't have enough people to review the applications. So it's something that we, again, wanted time, and part of what we included in our application was to say, hey, this is the interconnection feedback we've received. We know that it's buildable. And that was really important because we wanted to say this interconnection cost is going to give us the appropriate price of power. But there are those factors that we can't control because it's a federal government oversight process on PJM, and
it's just a utility that moves.
yeah.
So my question is, we go through the petition process and you guys don't pay a permit fee until you decide to pull the permit. Whether it be South Dixon, Eldina, or your project, there's a lot of heartburn and headache for all the county board members up here that, let's just say your project never gets built, or any of these projects never get built. I lost a lot of hours of sleep to this.
Right.
How do we capture some of that resource to make sure that we have the players in the
Right.
game? I don't want a fly-by-night company. You guys want to keep fly-by-night companies out.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something like a annual permit renewal fee or something like that requires, I don't know what the state, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know what can be done and what can't be done, but we're amenable to that because we've got a lot invested in this, and then we don't want it to go by the wayside. We also don't want to see a permit go bad. You guys don't want to say, hey, we approved this project that was going to bring this revenue in. They're still, are they diddling their thumbs? Are they sitting around? What are they doing? What's going on? We'd be amenable to something that shows us continuing to put good faith forward, especially if that gives us freedom to know that as we wait for the utility, that's just holding us up. Is PJM. We're on the phone with them every week, if not more often. Hey, what's the word? What's the word? What's the word? Oh, we're taking some extra time. Sorry, can't do it right now. That's the standard story.
But a perfect example is DeKalb County has indicated they want 15,000 acres of solar.
Yeah.
Maybe Lee County goes that route. I don't know. That's up to the planning. The problem is we've got 10,000 approved right now. Well, what if 5,000 never come to fruition? Like, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, and that's where I think what Scott was mentioning, an annual reporting requirement, I think is helpful because, and it's something that we see as we develop these projects, there are periods where nothing can happen, and really it does pertain to the utility. So over the,
not just on that side, but on this side too.
but certainly once we actually had the permit with Lee County, we've gone out, and it's something that we, again, talked about during the hearing process, where we had to do wetland delineations, title reports, environmental studies. So we've actually completed our phase 1 environmental site assessment, a full wetland delineation of the property. We're in the process of a phase 1 archaeological survey, a phase 1 architectural survey, a formal meets and bounds and ALTA survey. We've done preliminary geotech. We've completed full title searches back to commitment for really every single parcel that we're working with on the project. So those permits allow for us to do those late stage items. And at a project the size of Stewart Creek, it can take a year or more to do those studies. The survey itself has to take about 6 months. We had to fly the entire project to get a topographic aerial survey and find all the monuments. And we have also executed the AMA since that time. So really, there are a number of development items that occur right after a permit, and we made all of those investments also because of the representations that we had from the interconnection groups, because those do, like a wetlands delineation will expire over time. So we have to begin construction or we have to redo that entire survey, which again isn't inexpensive, but a lot of what we get held up on is a commitment and a tariff that we see from a utility that ultimately they don't have to adhere to because they just say, sorry, we don't have it right now, and that's their reasoning.
But to your question, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Your question, that's a tricky one, and I think we would be really supportive of some sort of mechanism to ensure that projects aren't just taking up, let's say you want 15,000, but you're sitting and it becomes clear that that developer washed their hands, walked away, hasn't notified the county that they're not moving forward.
How many community solars we had? I believe it was like 46.
Yeah, So,
No,
something like that.
speaking to the community solar, because that is something that was a really big challenge on the state side. So the background on that was the original Future Energy Jobs Act was passed to mandate that these community solar projects be built. And since states aren't necessarily developers and they don't see what price of power is or what it should be, they offered to pay upfront 15 years of the value of energy, which led to an extremely, extremely profitable project. And it caused almost every developer in the entire country, and in a lot of cases around the world, to go to Illinois and try and develop as many projects as possible, because they were looking for about 60 in total, 120 megawatts. They received in excess of 2 gigawatts of applications, which caused them to institute a lottery process. And so there were projects that had a $76,000 interconnect and projects that had a $1.5 million interconnect. And the $1.5 million were being built. And those are ultimately a much more expensive project, not great for the ratepayer, not great for the utility. And they should have had a more competitive process to incentivize that cheaper, more inexpensive and cost competitive electricity is generated from these projects. So ultimately, in doing that, they created a list of all of those projects that were then on a wait list from the lottery. They built a few of them, but then since the program was bankrupted instantly, they had to pass new legislation, which they married up with the Clean Energy Jobs Act that bailed out the Byron nuclear facility and Dresden nuclear facilities. So they provided better sources of funding that are not as lucrative, don't pay 15 years of electricity up front, which was a great process because it's much more expensive to provide all of that. So the reason those community solar projects are lying in limbo is they're waiting for additional guidance from the state. We're starting to see that guidance.
It's supposed to open up in February, I believe. And
yeah,
we got some pressure the other day on one. And
yeah, and then future programs of that are going to be opening up in 2023 going forward.
to the point, we had 46 and just figure at 20 acres a piece, that's 800 acres that ate up our queue for whatever plan he wants to come up with for how many total acres we want.
And likely all of those will not be built, just speak from what we've seen. So they allocated capacity to each developer. So if there was, if Hexagon say had 10 projects, we would have an allocation of 20 megawatts that we should have done, but they actually took that and dropped it down to about 1 megawatt. So you only get 1 megawatt for 20 megawatts. So they gave a proportional allocation to these developers, really to incentivize new projects and competitive projects are built around the state and around ComEd and Ameren service territories, but also to make it so that that wait list goes away, because that wait list is a long one and they were having a really hard time going through that and then working the rank. So that was a very unique one. And what is, I think, really beneficial with utility scale developments is we aren't beholden to state funding or state programs to build these projects. For us, if we have a price of power that's competitive and is able to go forward, that's all we need, because we're trying to sell power that's cheaper than wind, that's cheaper than natural gas, that's cheaper than nukes. And if we can do that, our project gets built. If we can't do that, then the project can't be built. So that's really important for a lot of these projects. They're very advanced in the queue with PJM. We're all at the same stage, which is the facility study. And that is that last hurdle that takes them a bit more time, but you only get to that point if you know you have a project that is going to have a great chance of being built on an interconnection side.
I have one more question for all of the developers in the room. What is substantially complete to you? And because I believe we have to clean that up. Like, that is a terminology. Curtis is over there like, I'm just adding more stuff for you to do, Curtis. But that's fine. But
Substantial completion with respect to construction.
yeah,
With respect to construction, like.
that's the problem is substantially complete to extend the permit. We know COVID happens. We know we get a blizzard that shuts you down for a month. You get 150-degree temperatures in the middle of the summer. You're probably not out there working at full speed. There has to be a give and take. And from the developers in the room, what do you see as a way?
Point, that's substantially complete. And maybe there's still a little section that you got to finish the wiring. There's a little 1 megawatt section, a little get done, and most of it's been done. That would be substantial completion. But back to what you were talking about, projects with permits eating up your acreage and then not getting anything done. That's the problem for us too, and also the problem for us is that not uncertainty about being able to renew our permit if for some reason the utility goes on further. We would really be supportive of, and if not switch gears too much for district, close that up. We'd be very supportive of some sort of methodology that requires proof of continued investment or proof of continued work on the project. That every year or something like that, we have to show that, even if we have to pay a hefty reapplication fee. We're okay with that because we've got a lot involved. If we get the comfort, we are still investing. There's some certainty of being able to extend our permit until we get an interconnection. But that also would help to weed out people who don't have the great need. So that helps you keep your fee clean.
Right.
So in terms of substantial completion, it's not until we put the switch and turn it on. But in terms of permit completion or nearing notice to proceed, that's when we get the interconnection permit and site.
Now, Chris asked substantially complete. I'm thinking substantially underway. That's,
And I think one of the first things that they do with these sites is to put up the fences, all the lay down yards, but they will be driving piles, certainly for this project, to get everything underway. So a lot of the time you'll want to see that the roads are completed, that the piles are driven, that the racking is up, because at times they might not, like with panel supply chain issues right now, which is something that we're also bearing the brunt of, is making sure that we can actually get everything. It does take time to get those, but once you have all the racking up and generally the collection points at the end of the lines completed, it's like putting up panels, which is more like Legos than anything else, because you have to just snap them into place. And it's much simpler, but you don't need a lot of heavy machinery to do that.
I have developers, or I've heard developers say that substantially complete doesn't even mean we have a fence in the ground or a post, because we spent so much money up to that point. And personally, I'm struggling with that. I believe
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that definition. I mean, similarly, we see some agreements that push a construction phase in a lease where a landowner who is now unable to farm is not getting the full rent promised to them. It's a substantially less percentage thereof. So we want to make it so if we're paying the full amount, we can bet that we're going to be trying to build that as quickly as possible, alongside the construction requirements in the county and the construction requirements that are put forth in the AMA for construction during wet weather, winter weather, to make sure all of that is done carefully, because we don't want to be really creating any issues outside of our stormwater prevention plan or erosion control and issues to roadways, which is something I know that we also have to adhere to and make sure are returned to condition. But yeah, substantially underway, certainly in my mind, implies ongoing construction activities and not the promise of construction.
Well, it may not even be construction activity. It may be study. We're waiting on the utility before we know infrastructure. There's an element of like a good faith agreement on this, but they really are investing here. They're not just and show us putting.
I love the idea of, I know that's something we want to address is a yearly review for both solar and wind, even after these projects are built. But even going from the time the proceedings are done to the permit fee, and hearing developers say, yeah, we know we have to come in, and if there's a fee associated with it to keep, and we're talking a nominal fee, but something to keep in your world, riffraff out.
Right. Like,
we're very amenable to that. That gives us some degree of comfort if the bylaw can be written or the rules can be written in such a degree that it shows good faith agreement or good faith development effort. And there's no
Emily, I'll turn it over to another developer in the room.
Yeah, but it was a pleasure. Thank you all for your time.
Well, yeah, well, do you guys have any more questions for Hexagon in regards to their site selections, or just appreciate all energy put in. If you've got some copies, I did take a picture, so.
And I can email a digital copy to you also.
If the only thing I would ask, just for reference purpose, if you can label those transmission lines, so that way when you're talking about specific ones, you say 894, you know which one 894 is. I have no idea which one that
We'll
is. So
do we don't have that on the copies we've got now, but we'll update that on our app. and
if you
take
can
that
send
out.
that to Alice, then we can get it into the board book for
Yeah.
future reference.
So thank you guys very much.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you all.
Thank you. Emily, do you want to, in regards to kind of, we'll go to that and then we'll go to battery storage if that works for you. But you kind of agree from a developer standpoint of what they're saying, that we want to keep the process moving, going, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think I'll clarify first. Hello, everyone. My name's Emily Skill. I work for Enel Green Power. Sorry if there's a lot of extra background noise there. I'll try to speak loudly and clear.
But they're heading.
To address your question here, Chris, I think I just want to clarify using the term substantially underway. That's what I'll be addressing. From our point of view, I think evidence of showing that you're currently working on studies that are necessary to construct the project, either evidence that they're in progress or evidence that they have been completed or are going to be complete in the near future could be that evidence. I think another substantial evidence of being underway could be negotiations with the contractor who will be purchasing the equipment to build the project, evidence of the down payment there, or communication with the contractor, or even a bid process showing that you're working to select that contractor. I think those are some items that would be classified as substantially underway. Additionally, it could also be a term sheet that is being negotiated with a potential power a company or organization that wants to buy the power through a PPA process as well. I'm not saying specifically that it has to be executed, but showing that the company's actively working to find someone to purchase that offtake could be another example. I'm not saying all of these should be met, but I think having an opportunity for the developer to showcase that they're meeting one or more of those items I just listed could be that evidence that you're looking for there.
Perfect. And I think that would be working with the zoning office directly to show some of those, some of that information. Would you agree with that? Because that's like right now, the community solar is kind of working off that we have so many full of petition that never amounted to anything. So I want to make sure that we continue to move this forward. And the state was, after hearing how they kind of screwed that up in the first place, which makes sense because it's the state, but we really want to make sure these projects that we approve continue to move forward.
Sure. And just to say one thing there with the interconnection delays, that has been an issue for, I think, every developer I've interacted with. It's definitely an issue for our company as well. Relying on these interconnection companies to provide our interconnection services agreements so that we can connect the project into the grid is a significant reason for project delays. I like that the county wants to see evidence that these developers are in good faith working toward construction, but sometimes there are things out of our hands, like interconnection. And before booting a project off, I would make sure you understand fully the reasoning so that you can identify those who are working in good faith effort and those that are wasting your time.
Before we jump into battery energy storage, I've been asked for a bio break. If we want to take about 5 minutes here, come back at call it 10:37. Try to be as quick as we can. 10:40. I believe we've got battery backup storage and then whatever anybody else has in the room to discuss. So we'll take a quick recess. Jonathan, you good? Emily, you want to go ahead and dive into battery storage? Oops.
Okay, so what I'm handing out right now is a template that our company put together. This is not to be adopted in its current form. This is just to give you something to start with. I also have included a little informational pamphlet on battery storage that our company put together as well. I'll get
You.
we'll be sending over an electronic process. And today, I'm not hoping, I don't want to go through this in detail. I want to give you time to review this and maybe put together another meeting where we can discuss the details. With a little bit more time.
What's that? Pass those around, take one, pass it around. So what, at the end of the day, Emily, it's no different than when it comes to the pipeline or anything along some of these lines. We really have no idea what we're doing. And we're going to rely on industry to help us because you want the biggest and best. And as we've talked, if we said it once, we've said it 100 times, we want to keep the riffraff out. And so what in this ordinance you want to highlight or
I'll just start and kind of give a backstory about how this was drafted and what our intention is here with providing this document to you today. So Enel Green Power is a global company. We have battery storage all over the world, but I'd like to focus on the United States today. In the United States, we have an up and running large scale, I think it's about 50 megawatt battery storage project that's co-located with solar in Texas. And we have another project that's being built there as well. Our company also has a subsidiary called Enel X. Enel X works with businesses and other corporations to build moderately scaled battery storage as well. We've got lots of projects in the northeast of the country where we've worked with different entities on battery storage. So our company has written and provided this to you. Got some background music today. Provided this to you as an example from what we've learned so far and our experience and what we recommend from a safety perspective. This was not drafted by me. This was drafted by our engineers and our experts in battery storage. It was reviewed by our environmental and permitting experts and also external counsel and local counsel to make sure that we're trying to identify here what's important to Lee County and also what's important when we're thinking about battery scale projects across the state, because this might become a template that's used in other locations as well. So there are a couple of safety requirements here that have been listed federally as recommendations that should be followed with battery storage. You'll see that listed as NFPA 855 and this UL listing as well. Those are coming from our engineers. I would like to set up another meeting, maybe a breakout session to kind of go through what that means in more detail so we can understand what's been done federally to put safety requirements on battery storage.
so really, if the federal government's already addressed the safety concerns, I don't know how much we need to get into it. Like they're going to have way more experts in the field that if they're putting certain standards in place for you to follow, the last thing you want is an accident, and you're going to be confined by what the national government says. So I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. Does anybody else see a reason to, as far as safety goes?
I concur.
Great. So, when I'm giving this to you in addition to this battery storage sort of fact sheet here. I think there are some references to some of those federal standards as well. So if you are interested in doing some of your own research, those resources are listed in the ordinance and also on this fact sheet. We don't have to discuss those specifics today. I don't think this is the time for it, but I'm happy to work with you all in like a breakout session where we, dive in a little bit deeper into battery if that's something that.
The
board is
one who's gonna
interested in.
want to know is Wilson. Everybody else is okay with what the state puts in place. He's gonna care the most, so unfortunately, he can't be here right now.
So, I didn't really have much to cover today, other than just providing you with these resources, giving you some time to review, and then being here when you'd like to go through it a little bit more in depth and answer any specific questions you have.
We currently don't allow wind or solar. Well, we do allow solar in industrial zone for one specific purpose. Do you see a reason why we need to allow, when I look at page 3 here, is there a reason to allow energy storage systems in commercial or industrial zones in today? Or there is?
Battery storage goes beyond these systems that they're presenting. I mean,
Okay.
they're a part of residential solar and everything else. So
The one thing I wanted to, two things. So first, the text in highlighted yellow, that's just areas where we'd like you to fill that in with what fits for your county.
Okay.
In green, those are areas that could easily be deleted if you don't see them fitting. But with that said, I want to just go to the definitions. We've identified this ordinance to be for utility scale battery storage. So when you're thinking about where you want to see this zoned, I think that question should come into play here. This isn't intended for, small projects that might be hooked up to someone's house or to someone's small solar scale or solar farm, or to, a business for backups power. This is intended for larger projects. What that number is going to be up to you all, like what you want to define as what makes utility scale. It could be cutting it off 5 megawatts and larger as utility scale. It could be cut off at 10 megawatts and larger as utility scale. We want to leave this open-ended to see what makes sense to Lee County. And we don't have to decide, today, but in terms of discussion points, that's one item that, I just wanted to bring up today and have you all thinking about.
On-site use, off-site use. Kind of how we're doing solar. We split it. We're not splitting it based on size. We're splitting it on where the energy is being used. So Rick's got it running his grain elevator, and he needs battery storage for that versus somebody putting it up to sell to the industry. I think that's kind of where this committee seems to want to go as far as solar goes. I don't see a reason why this would be any different.
without reading it first. I mean,
Right,
In
but
theory,
Yeah.
that sounds right, but I
Yeah.
do want to take a look at it first.
Yeah, we need to.
we
read
need
the
to
document.
investigate it more, but
Individual, right, but you could get very big if you got someplace like Smart Flat wants to make a bigger story.
that's okay with, but there's,
But it falls under outside, but the battery for your computer is
different.
same thing.
Okay.
I think one other thing I just want to say too about this, this has been drafted for standalone battery storage. The way the technology is moving into the future, it seems that there is an opportunity, I think also an interest to have battery storage standalone without having it coupled or co-located with wind and solar. So we wanted to make sure you had an ordinance that didn't rely on a developer also having to have wind or solar. So this would mean for our company, which we're not planning to permit for another 1.5 years or more. But when we come to you asking for a permit, we would have to submit our application materials for a battery storage permit and also for wind. You would have to do 2 applications. We think this is the best way to keep things simple. But again, this is our recommendation to you. And just with where we're seeing the industry go, we think it makes sense to have a separate ordinance so that if a developer comes in and just wants to do battery storage, they have the ability to do that.
As I sit here and look at setbacks, we'll want to get that more in line with what we already have in place from solar, wind, and industrial standards. So they've got numbers in here, but I don't think they currently match what our other ordinances have in place.
Agreed. We need time to go through this.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is there any additional questions for Emily? I see Anthony's up there, Ben's up there. Do they have anything they want to add, Ben or Anthony?
I don't, oh,
You're back on mute, Anthony.
I don't have it.
Yeah, nothing to add here. Well said, Emily.
maybe not.
I'm guessing they're,
For-
Emily and Anel, we definitely appreciate you putting this together. We'll look through this and hopefully get something together here sooner than later.
Well, if you have any other questions, please contact Courtney, and she can connect with me and we'll do what we can to get those addressed.
Perfect, appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Glenn, I'm gonna go around the room real quick because I've got nothing else. We're gonna work with Curtis on the ordinances. There's no reason to start discussing them now until we get through finance and figure out, why put an effort that somebody else is gonna do, is my opinion,
So is there nothing then this board can do
until finance decides what needs to be done. It's okay, take a deep breath, you'll be fine. Glenn, do you have anything? Anything moving around the room? Anybody in the visitor section have anything they would like to address from today's meeting, or if they have questions from what we may have discussed? We got a lot of information over the last 2 hours, and appreciate everybody being part of it. So open it up here now for visitors' comments if there are any. Hearing none.
If Courtney can supply these as the electronic documents, these last two, and then we can put them in our on book, or on board, sorry.
Also, when this committee does then come back, I think that we probably should pick a focal point, and maybe not try to cover everything at once, but pick the priorities.
Yeah,
Pipeline is definitely a priority, but we're needing assistance getting a draft. And I think the solar ordinance is probably our next priority.
I believe that we're kind of at the mercy of finance getting it passed through
Correct.
to decide whether or not we're, as a committee, going to try to put it all together, or if we're going to contract somebody, which I think this committee is very much behind somebody else.
We
with.
need a professional in this. We're not.
But we can still put together points that we have thought about or brought up, this committee
Yeah.
brought
Yeah,
together.
so they're already.
So when a professional comes on the table, we have a sheet ready to go.
Yep, so they're in your board book right now, Dave. So page 16 is solar. Page 84 is wind. And so these are the issues that we addressed at the last meeting that we knew needs to be addressed specifically. We're not talking about setbacks, we're not talking about vegetative buffers, fences, or anything like that, but there's definitely this information in here that needs to be specifically addressed, so.
For those checklists, I did type those up based off of what came out of the last meeting. Some of your writing is in red. Those were additional comments that I had based in the last year of being in my position. I've taken notes on things that we need to probably look at for those ordinances. So that's what that is. Those did not.
Perfect. Once again, I think we need to decide what we're doing with Curtis before we move forward. I'd love to set another meeting date, but there's no rush to, if we have to figure out what finance is going to do before we rush into it. So
I think we need to set a meeting date. Obviously it's going to go to finance, go to the full board, but let's get a date after the next full board meeting. So we've all got it on our calendar.
when is the next school board? February is a short month.
17th.
Yes, yes.
Thursday.
I thought it was I was with Dave. I got it right here. Hold on.
Why we should have it in the book here.
It's February 24th is the next board meeting. Finance is February 17th.
all on the
Yep.
calendar.
Correct. The 24th is the next county board meeting, so that doesn't leave you a whole lot of time for in February to get anything done. So if we wanted to do anything, my suggestion would be like a March 3rd. That allows us to commit to some time with Curtis. So that way he can see if he gets anything done, and then we can always put it on the calendar for March 3rd. And if we have to cancel the meeting for some reason, we just cancel the meeting. Is that-
I agree, but you know, I like the idea of getting it on our calendars at least.
Okay. Yep. At 9 a.m. Jonathan, what's your question there? Okay, so I've got a question from Zoom. If the finance committee approves the contract, is there a timetable for the ordinance process, was asked for Zoom. There's not really a timetable. Our challenge is we have a lot of things to go through, whether it be pipeline as a number one. We continue to kick that. They're ready. We've got wind and solar. So we're at the Anel? For which one? I think he's ready to go as soon as we approve it. Yeah, so.
They've already been in contact with their office. They have provided them all the documents that we're working with. That question came from Stephen Hall with Amoresco, and so we need to keep things moving as quick as possible.
We
Because they,
do, but we're also at the mercy of the finance committee.
right, so I'm saying though, I mean, there's nothing we can do until that part is, yep, that needs to be done, but then as soon as if they approve that, I mean, the goal is to move forward full speed ahead as quickly as we're able to do. So.
This doesn't go to finance, but us doing it ourselves. Any time, but it's not, so.
Hey,
But this is a changing world and we have to
sure, probably.
get professional help, so.
Yep,
this is
so
on.
that's a discussion
We
for
got
Rick.
finance here, we got finance over there, we got one finance on Zoom.
Yeah.
Did he take off?
He jumped off, but let's have them have the discussion and then we'll put together a plan. So. Yeah, let's have them discuss it. We've done our research and recommendation, and that's all we can do, so. Anything else?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Ms. Shippert, Mr. Kitson is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.